Welcome to Spectrum Perspectives, real talk with parents, professionals, and autism advocates, with your host, Cindy Gellermini.
Hi, everyone. This is Cindy with another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I have Melissa Doman on. Hi, Melissa. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Cindy. It's great to be here.
So one of the big issues that parents have with autistic kids is that they don't sleep. And I know for me personally, when Robbie was little, we lived in a two-family house when we were first married, and we lived upstairs from my in-laws. And Robbie was not a good sleeper. He'd stay up till midnight, or if he fell asleep early, he'd be up at 3 a.m. And when he woke up, man, he was hyper. He was jumping up and down. We had to put on his Disney videos, and we're upstairs and they hear the banging, downstairs. And it started to cause some friction between the family. I'm like, what do you want me to do about it? And I know I'm on some Facebook pages with autism parents, and I've seen a couple of them mention that live in apartments, that they're having issues, and I get it. I understand. So the thing that I would love to know is, why do they not sleep? What's going on in there neurologically in their brain? And why are they waking up at 3 a.m.? Why can't they sleep? And so I looked online and I had to find an expert that deals with this. And lo and behold, here's Melissa. So Melissa, I'm happy to have you here. And why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I've worked with kids with special needs and many different diagnoses over the last 12 years or so. I'm a certified child brain developmentalist, and I'm a Doman method coach. And I know that's my last name. And that's because I'm married to the grandson of the founder of the Doman method. So,
oh, well, how about that? Okay,
yeah,
so why don't you tell us, do you want to tell us what the Doman method is? Or
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so basically the core philosophy of the Doman method is that children with any kind of neurodevelopmental issue has the potential and the possibility to thrive and to make all of the important changes that they need to, despite what the doctors and specialists say to parents, because we all know that prognoses are never that great when a child gets a diagnosis, unfortunately. But with the Doman method, our philosophy is that, like, if you're really targeting the root of the neurodevelopmental issues, which is the brain, neurodevelopmental means there's something going on in the brain. So with our methods, it's a higher frequency, a slightly more intense therapy style where we really just get the best results, because again, we're giving the brain everything that it needs so that the pieces can come together and we can unlock those major milestones that every child should be making. And of course, every child's path looks different from, depending on the severity of the diagnosis and things like that. But, I've had the pleasure to see over the years, hundreds of kids learn to read, talk, walk, like make all of these incredible changes, again, despite what the prognosis was at the get-go. But it was my work as a child brain developmentalist and as a Doman method coach where sleep was the issue that kept coming up. And when I first started, 2-3 years in as a coach, parents would take me in the office and they'd be like, my kid's not sleeping. We're exhausted. And when they asked me what to do, I was like, I don't know. And at a certain point, like out of desperation, like I would try to work with the family and problem solve it, and things weren't clicking. And what was particularly frustrating was, like, I knew that the child was getting what they needed, like with regards to their brain development. So why wasn't the sleep just improving naturally? So what I did was I started to research, and when you ask the universe a question, the universe answers back. And a family that I was working with at the time, they had an 18-month-old with cerebral palsy, and he was waking like some ungodly amount, like 18 times a night or something like
Mm.
that. And the mom in her own research found a program called Sleep Sense. And she said, I did this for 3 weeks and now he's sleeping through the night. And I was like,
Mm.
okay, there's something here. So
Mhm.
I dug and I dug and I dug, and I started to implement the sleep training philosophy through Sleep Sense just from the book that I had read. And when I saw, like, just instantly within weeks, my families were getting well rested, the kids were sleeping, the therapy was going so much better. I knew, like, okay, there's something here. So
So hold on. So this sleep sense, that's just for any child, not for special needs
any
kids.
child,
So
yeah,
it's sleep
exactly.
training, basically.
Yeah. Now, what I realized as I started to work with, well, and of course, I found the book, I got certified. I actually trained personally with the founder of the Sleep Sense program. Um, and as I started to work with more special needs families, what I realized was, like, okay, well, now we have the sleep training part of this, but what do we do about the brain development component?
Right.
And,
So
you know,
hold on, before you get to the brain development, I just want to focus on the sleep, only because the sleep sense, because my daughter has a 20-month-old. Okay.
uh,
And my girls are twins, and my other daughter has a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. So the one with the oldest, my oldest grandson, who's 5, she's a special ed teacher. She's very regimented. Everything is done on time. Everything is, just the way she is, right? She did the sleep training with Beckett. Okay. And I remember going down to see them in North Carolina in the beginning, and he wasn't sleeping and she wasn't sleeping, and they were both miserable, and he was crying and right? So she got it. I think it's like an app. There's a book and there's an app, right? She
yeah.
started doing the sleep training, and the blackout shades, the sound machine
Oh
on
my,
on the schedule for his age, right?
right.
And within, like, I don't know, a matter of a week or two, the kid was sleeping through the whole night,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then next time I went down to see them, they were like 2 new people, they both were happy. And now she's so in tune to it. Like, we'll be at the pool and she sees another kid that's being really cranky, and she's like, they should have been taking a nap an hour ago. They're overtired, and she knows it when she sees it now, right?
Yeah.
So she told her sister to do it, right? And she did it, Denise. So the 20-month-old, he's been doing the sleep, and they also wear the little zip up sleep sack,
Like sleep
right?
sack,
It's
yeah.
like it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing, right? And so when they're younger, like, and I used to babysit him in the beginning also. So I knew, like, I had the schedule written down. So when I was raising my kids, it's when they start looking tired, when they start falling asleep, that's when you put him in, right? No, he could be like wide awake, but you put him in, zip him up, sound machine, and he just lays down, goes to sleep. He knows it's time for me to go to sleep, right? And he's been sleeping through the night since he was, since little. And so I never liked a sleep schedule with my kids, because I wanted to be able to be flexible to go anywhere, and they just fall asleep in the stroller, fall asleep in the car, whatever, where I could just take them. Where my only issue with it is it's so regimented that it's like, no, you lock down. It's like, so he's down to 1 nap a day, and I know every day between 1 and 3, I'm not going to see him, because he's got to be home in his room, dark room, sleeping from that time, from 1 to 3. It is what it is. Don't mess with the schedule. And if you mess with the schedule, he gets very cranky. So my question to you is that what you're talking about, or is this something different?
No, so I mean, that was kind of when I learned about sleep training. Yes, I mean, that's where it started for me. And of course, like, I mean, every family is a little bit different, and some families, they take that schedule to, like, to the end. Like, that is what we do. And my sister-in-law is the same way with my nephew. I know, like, 1 to 3, I don't call, don't he's napping.
Right.
And I mean, even like family vacations, it's like, oh, Jackson he's got to go down. Like,
Yep.
this is it. So, but that being said, I think, like, the families that I work with, I realize, like, okay, yes, we need to have schedule to a certain point, and we know that our kids on the spectrum, they crave that routine and they need that structure. But at the same time, it's like, well, we have 3 different therapies. We've got, school and this and that. And like, just the life of a special needs family, you have to have some flexibility there too. So like when it comes to sleep training, there's the scheduling component, there's encouraging independence in sleep. There's just putting the right habits into place around like getting ready for bed and nap. So there's many different elements of it. But what I started to find working with more special needs families, as I was saying before, was like we were putting all of that in place. Okay, so we had the perfect schedule, we had the independence, we had all the right habits, but things were still like not going well. So that's where I took my training as a child brain developmentalist and the sleep training and kind of put it all together.
Right.
So with every family that I work with, we talk about sleep training in the sense of encouraging a decent schedule, independence, things like that, but making sure that we're factoring in everything that brain and body needs in order to have a good night's sleep. Because we can't, like, I found so many times over the last 5.5 years, like it can't be exclusively one thing or the other. Like they have to work together. Because it's, the brain is doing so much at night. And if there's any disorganization in that sleeping process, like we're going to see bumps in the road. And there are external factors, there is that internal factor of that kind of like brain balance that we have to strike as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know you had asked before, like, why are kids up at 3 a.m. and things
Right.
like
And
that
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's one thing if they fall asleep, but he wouldn't stay asleep. And it's like these kids are just on these very short cycles, and it's and they're wired when they wake up. I mean, and hyper. And there's so many parents. Like I took a screenshot of a dad in the hospital, and what they wrote above was, this is what exhaustion does from no sleep, from the kids just not sleeping. And it just seems like their bodies don't need more than 3 hours of sleep. Like, how is that possible? What is going on? And it's funny that I'm doing this interview because the other night I couldn't sleep. I was up till 3:30, almost 4 o'clock in the morning, just tossing and turning in my bed the entire night. Like couldn't sleep.
Oh, sure.
And I've learned with me, if I'm on my computer or my phone too much, right? Like if I'm working on these videos, let's say I'm editing them, right? If I do that till like 10 o'clock at night, forget it. My brain is like, it's too hyper, and it takes me 3-4 hours to wind down before I can actually get tired and go to sleep. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm sure that's part of sleep training, is like, getting off devices and whatever.
Yeah.
But I just feel like, but that shows me there's something going on. It's affecting my brain, right? And there's something going on in here. And I know there's a lot of adults that, they can't shut their brain off. They'll say, they have trouble going to sleep because they're thinking too much,
Right. Yeah.
So, and that again is something, that's the brain, so, so
exactly.
so what's the brain connection? What's going on in there?
Well, so I think the first thing that we have to understand is like the brain at night, that's the time where the brain is literally taking everything we've learned through the day, and kids, adults, everybody. And it's basically taking things from temporary storage to permanent storage. So with all of those sleep cycles, yes, it's our time for our body to rest and recuperate, but the brain is taking that information, it's organizing it, it's throwing out the junk that we don't need, and then it's going through and doing spring cleaning as well. So it's a way for the brain to start with a clean slate the next day, so that it can be ready to learn, it can be ready to be adaptable and things like that. So when we're getting a good night's rest, the brain is able to do that as efficiently as it can. And although the brain needs that sleep, there are so many other factors that can come in that interrupts that very delicate process. And for some of us, it's like, you wake up in between a sleep cycle and your mind's running. That was me the other night. I slept until 3:30 and then my mind just went. So it even happens to sleep coaches.
You were waking up when I was going to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's things like, daily stress, nutrition, the sensory component. I mean, there's so many different things that can throw a wrench in the works when it comes to sleep. And for my kids on the spectrum, what you described is so common for my kids. They can sleep for 3 or 4 hours and then all of a sudden they're just up and they're ready to party, and there's just like no end in sight. Like it seems like they could never go back to sleep. And when I first started working with families with kids on the spectrum, I kept hearing that over and over and over again. I was like, well, what the heck is going on? Like, why is that happening? And in my own research, what I found was, like, between the hours of 1 to 4 a.m., essentially the first thing that happens is that our sleep changes. So we're not in that really deep restorative sleep. We're now more predominantly in that kind of rapid eye movement sleep, which is still just as important, but not as deep. So if a child has any sensory processing issues themselves, what happens is when the sleep is not as deep, the eyes are picking up on little tiny lights, the ears are scanning the environment, maybe the sheets don't feel as well as they should, or, like, if the child fell asleep next to mom, now she's gone, and that tactile system's like, okay, well, wait, hey, where is it? I need that. So the problem is that, like, when that sensory system starts to kick in, it goes like this. I mean, it's just 0 to 60. And that's when we start to see those big, long wake ups. And for any family, that would be alarming. But to see that happen 2, 3 nights a week, every night of the week. I mean, I just spoke with a family yesterday. Their child's up 2 to 5 hours every single night. And, I think often it's like the very common misconception about kids with autism is like, oh, well, if they're up in the middle of the night and they seem to have so much energy during the day, they just don't need enough sleep. And what that says to me is, like, no, they're chronically overtired. They have a sensory systems that is not getting what it needs. So we're having those big long wake ups, and then during the day they're really hyperactive and moving around because they're just so sleep deprived, and the brain literally doesn't know what to do with itself. And I've had the pleasure to see dozens and dozens and dozens of kids on the spectrum who were maybe getting 6 or 7 hours a night, all of a sudden are getting the amount of sleep they need for their age. They're getting that 10 to 12 hours because finally we've struck that balance and the brain is able to do what it needs. Now, of course, it's not perfect every single night. Like, there are still nights at 2 a.m. where the brain's like, okay, well, heard that. That's it.
Right.
But if anything that we can do to make that system more efficient, the better. And we're going to see results in that.
So give me some examples of some of the kids you've worked with and what you did to help them.
Sure. Where do I start? Well, I had a child recently that I worked with where, and this is, again, very common situation where, like, initiating sleep was not so difficult, but he would be up in the middle of the night and he would, like, we could see it on the monitor. He would kind of go through the same loop just for 3 hours straight. He'd walk to this thing, he'd check his light, he'd go over here, he'd play with the blinds, then he'd come back. And it was just, how do we break that loop? And one of the first things that we did was, of course, well, if he needs somebody lying down next to him to get to sleep, let's take that factor out. So we know, okay, like that tactile system is not kicking in and saying, all right, where's mom? Where's dad? What do I do with myself? But in addition to that, we did multiple different, like, tactile techniques through joint compression, through yoga, through stretching, through, like, all of those different things to make sure that even before his head hit the pillow, that need was met. And we had to, trying to think now. We had to.
You do a weighted blanket with somebody like that?
No, I find that like I've definitely had plenty of kids who have had weighted blankets, and I think in all my years of doing this, I can probably count on one hand how many times I've actually recommended it. Because a weighted blanket in a lot of ways is kind of like it's almost like a Band-Aid. So yes, I mean, it's giving some pressure, it's giving some weight, but if it moves a little bit, then it's not going to do what it needs to. And I think a lot of my kids on the spectrum generally just tend to run a lot hotter. So it helps that, if your body temperature is too high, staying in that deep restorative sleep is becoming a lot more difficult. So like now we've just kind of thrown another wrench in the works. So what I find is that with joint compressions during the day and in the bedtime routine, I utilize like contrasting sensation stimulation during the day. So rough, smooth, teaching the tactile system how to perceive those different sensations. Then all of a sudden, oh, I don't need that weighted blanket. I don't need mom or dad here giving me those tight squeezes to get to sleep. And of course, every kid is different, but this child, once we started to do that, like, I think in the first week and a half, like he was sleeping through the night, like 3 or 4 times a week, which had not happened for months and months and months. Now the independence part of, of his sleep training plan took a bit longer, but it was because he started to understand very quickly, oh, if I tell mom I have to go potty, she's going to take me out of the room and I'm going to go potty. So all of a sudden he was asking 5 or 6 or 7 times a night, mommy, potty. And it was because he was going through potty training and he knew if I say potty, all hands on deck, like that's it. So kids are very, very smart. And I think it's kind of a relieving thing for parents to see, because then they realize like, oh, wow, they understand a lot more than I've been giving them credit for. Because all of a sudden, when there's a need to get mom and dad, they're going to find a way to make that happen. So with this kid, he was so funny. He would, one week it was potty. The next week it was snacks and water. And then the next week it was something else. So like he tried all of his possibilities. And then once parents were really like clear and consistent on those boundaries, he realized, okay, well, I guess I should just stay in bed, which he did. And, at the end of our time together, he was sleeping through the night most nights. If he did wake up, he was able to stay in bed. If he had to do like his little loop a couple times, he could, but he was able to get himself to sleep faster and more consistently as well. And the beauty of it is that like for him, even during our time together, there were some big adjustments that were happening. Like, the whole family got sick. He changed therapies. There were new therapists. And what was a really big issue before with those transitions, like all of a sudden now he's sleeping better. And it wasn't as big of a monumental shift for him. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with like, he was a bit more independent himself, but because he was sleeping better, those transitions, he was a bit more go with the flow compared to previous changes, which was really nice to see. Of course, we talked about like all the possibilities of like, okay, if, he's changing therapy, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to handle those like big transitions. And he did great with it. He really did. And it was, like I said, it was just really nice to see how well he did with that. Cause I know that for a lot of kids that could take weeks of like getting accustomed to that new person or that new place, in their lives.
Yeah. So that can affect the sleep too, do you think? Because that's just stress. Like adults are thinking about the bills and all that kind of stuff, but the kids might be thinking about, I don't know who that therapist was that showed up at my house today,
Yeah. And that's the thing, like from therapist to therapist, one person might be working on this, but then the next new person bumps up the intensity all of a sudden, or, so like the kid is a little bit overworked, but it's a new person, and that can cause stress. And of course, we know for a lot of our kids on the spectrum, that ability to communicate your needs and to advocate for yourself is not always there. So when you don't have a way to communicate that, you're absolutely, we're going to see that in sleep. I remember I had a kid, how many, it was a, I think it was at the beginning, I worked with them a year ago. And then at the beginning of this year, the parents reached out again because they were like, now he's waking up at 4 a.m. every single morning and we don't know why. Now he had some language, but what we did was we dug a little bit and we realized, okay, maybe there's something going on at school. Something changed at school. So what we started to do was we came up with a few questions that he could answer given his communication level. So it was like, how was your day? What was the best thing? What was maybe something that was really tough? And I can't remember, the last question was something like, who do you love the most? Or what do you have to look forward to? And at first we had to give choices. So it wasn't even like we were asking him for something verbal. We would say like, okay, was the best thing today that you saw your friends, that you had a really good lunch, that it was this, and he was able to choose. But what started to happen was he started to realize like, okay, we're going through these questions every day. And all of a sudden something came up like maybe a week or so later, and one of the kids at school kept taking his things, right? So finally, like through those choices, he started to advocate for himself. And then like it just snowballed from there. The parents and the teachers were saying like, now Ethan is just like saying everything. He's telling us everything. Which was really great. But then what we saw was all now, those mornings started to become 5:30, 6 a.m. again, which was exactly what we wanted. So, we know as adults, like stress can really weigh on us. It can affect our sleep, but no question, like that can affect our kids as well, even as young as 2 or 3, as they're starting new services or things are changing. Like, the tricky thing is that they may not realize it's that stress of all these new changes, these new people. And again, they may not always have that way to communicate it with parents.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm remembering when Robbie was little, there were times where he was just crying and crying for like, I couldn't figure out what he was crying about. And the only thing that ever made him feel better was to put his Disney videos on. Like he didn't want a hug. He didn't want any, he just wanted his videos, and he would cry, and, and it just breaks your heart just to see him crying. But I interviewed a mom, I don't remember who said it, but they said that is a form of seizures. An uncontrollable crying can be a seizure, which I had never heard before. But again, I don't know that it was a seizure, but it can tell me again, something's going on neurologically, like what is going on in there? What's making him cry, and I'm remembering the 3 a.m., like literally jumping up and down, being noisy and so hyper and excited. It's like, how can you have that
Well, and
in the morning?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, because some kids with the way that their brains are wired, and this is a very common question that comes up with my families, is like we hit a certain threshold where like all of a sudden the crying really can't stop. The upset, the big emotions, like it's just, we hit a corner and it's just, now we have to wait it out. And it's almost as if like the wheels are stuck in the brain and it's just stuck on this repeat. And yes, finding a way to, I don't like to say break the cycle, but finding a way to try and distract the brain, get other areas starting to work a little bit, helps to alleviate that. But I think for a lot of parents who hear sleep training, they think, oh, like it's hours of crying and blah, blah, blah. And of course, for my kids, like we can't risk that, because we know like there is a certain time where enough crying, they're going to get stuck in that loop, and that's going to be a lot harder to come down from. So it's something that, it's a very delicate thing to have to navigate. But yeah, it's really like just kind of fascinating to see. And when you think about like all the possibilities that's going into like, okay, well, why are they so amped up or crying or whatever? There's so many different stones to turn over, which, you know, for me, like as a natural problem solver, I love it because I'm like, okay, well, we did this. All right, let's see what this one elicits. This one, this one, this one. Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of, when you do the sleep training, like what is that exactly? Like, are you putting them through a routine before they go to bed, like that type of thing, so that they know? Because I didn't figure that out until Robbie was probably 15, to put him through this actual routine of TV goes off, brush the teeth, da da da, go to bed.
Yeah.
And he finally, but I felt like when he was younger, he wasn't ready for that. I felt like he didn't understand it until he got older. And then we finally got him into, but however, we also were giving him clonidine every night because that's how doctors solve it. You go to the doctor, they prescribe clonidine. He was on that since he was 5 years old because it just, you know, it lowers their blood pressure, makes him feel tired, and off he goes. But there's a lot of parents that don't want to go that route, you know, so they don't want to just medicate them right away. So I know that there's parents that do give melatonin, you know, but I'd like to know what kind of advice can you give to people listening? Like, what are some practical things that they can try to do on their own? And then when it doesn't work, they call you.
Great question. So I think the first thing is to really establish that wind down routine for your child. And that, I mean, that's not groundbreaking to kids with special needs in any way. Like we all have a bedtime routine. We've been doing it for so long. We don't even think twice about it. Right. So, you know, I think first of all, like having that wind down routine is crucial, but also it's your chance to make sure that any of those like lingering needs from the day are being met. So, you know, if it's been a particularly busy day with ABA or school or PT or whatever, you know, okay, like bedtime routine, we're going to start off with some quiet play, right? We're going to, whether that's doing magnetiles or doing puzzles or even just like listening to music and reading books, like that's a good way to start off. I always encourage parents to do something along the lines of tactile. So something like a joint compression, some yoga, some stretching if your child is good with mimicking and things like that. Not like independence aside, it's a very good way to kind of have an outlet to let go of any little stressors that have built up through the day. It's a way to regulate the breathing a little bit. It's a way to just start and especially with a body that's maybe on the go all day long, it's a good way to say, all right, let's come back down. Let's come into the present. Let's get slowing things down a little bit. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly things that you want to avoid in a sleep routine as well. So like cutting screens at least an hour before bed is a good place to start. Some of my kiddos, we actually have to put a cap on the total screen time during the day. So I have some families who are like, look, we've done the hour before bed, been there, done that, like, but we're still having issues. So the next place we look is like, well, how many hours a day of screen time is your child getting? And very often they're getting more than they really should. So for some children, like I said, it's not only that build up before bedtime, but you know, if we hit an hour, maybe 90 minutes in total, maybe the screens have to go away altogether.
It's so hard because I mean, oh God.
Yeah, and
you know, a lot of them,
the last couple of years, that's been a very hard one to navigate. Like,
yeah, well, it's all they want. It's all they want, and then if you say no, I mean, you get a complete meltdown. You know, so yeah.
Well, and I've had with some children, there are certain things that they use to help regulate, which we know is throwing a wrench in the works when it comes to their sleep. So there are some kids that I work with who like to look at the tablet as they're falling asleep, but even if they fall asleep relatively quickly, no question, they're going to have really disrupted sleep at night. I mean, I'll see that all the time. So like, we may have to put a step in the routine where like we officially put the tablet away for the day. So parents take it, they show them, all right, it's going
Yeah,
on.
tablet has to go night now.
Exactly. Yeah. So you make it very clear, like that's where it's going. And all right, now we're going to do the rest of our routine. And I mean, I've had some kids who will use the tablet for 3 hours before bed. And within 3 nights, they're like, okay, tablet, bye, see you later. They're okay. But yeah, I think definitely starting with a really good, consistent bedtime routine and giving your child more time for it as well. Typically for kids, it's recommended a 20 to 30 minute bedtime routine. Most of my children on the spectrum need about 45 minutes to an hour for that real, true wind down time. And some kids need a little bit more. I was working with a 10-year-old a few months ago, and in his routine, we had to put in, I think about like 10 or 15 minutes for his sensory swing, which bumped things out to an hour and a half. Right. But he was able to sleep, relatively well through the night. He was getting 9.5 hours or so, which compared to the 4 weeks before was like not like unreal. Right. But we figured out like for him, he needed that time. So there are certain things that parents should just like kind of intuitively and trust their instincts on like, yeah, maybe we do need a little bit more movement. We need to wind things down a lot faster, depending on the day. So right. Yeah, it's a really great way to start things off. And ultimately, like if independence is one of the goals that you want to achieve, having a really good, consistent bedtime routine in place, like with a checklist, with the visual, it makes that process so much easier, so much easier, because you've built that predictability for your child.
Right. Yeah. Part of the sleep training that my girls do is bath time. Yeah. They get the bath, read the books, lights out, boom, in. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking of that. It's kind of like the joint compression and everything. It's like something about the warm bath that I think relaxes them.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are some children I work with where the bath is actually too overstimulating. So if that's the case, then we know.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. See, Robbie, he loved the water. I mean, he would get excited if I put him in the shower. Yeah. No, he showered in the morning instead. And also the other reason was because he would drink the water all the time in the shower and then he would pee the bed, so it's like, yeah, that doesn't work. He needs to.
Yeah, that was fun. I learned that one a few years ago because I had a kid who like his sleep was fine. Otherwise, he just kept waking up with a soaking diaper. And I was like, what's going on? We've cut liquids 3 hours before bed. Like he's eating dry foods. And then I asked mom, I was like, all right, let's circle back to bath time. Like, is there any possibility he's drinking the water? And she was like, oh yeah, big time. And I was
and like, there you go. And there you go. Yep. Yeah. What about diet? Does that affect it?
Diet is a tough one because it's, I find for a lot of my kids, there's only a certain amount of foods that they're willing to eat from the beginning.
Right.
So I can't, what I've learned over the years is that when I first started, I would encourage parents like, okay, we need to cut down sugar. We need to cut down dairy, gluten. And of course, those things are really important for sleep. But as I started to see kids who are more and more picky around their eating, I was like, I'm eliminating 3/5 of the kids' diet. I can't do that. Right. So what I will typically do at first is, I have a list of foods that parents can try with their child in order to give their body the nutrients that it needs to have a good night's sleep. So magnesium to help them feel calm, calcium so their body can actually create melatonin. That's something that people give melatonin, but they forget that part of like, well, maybe your body needs more calcium and most of us need more calcium. We have that.
That's a good one right there. Yeah. Because everybody's cutting out all the dairy, right? And right?
Yeah.
Calcium's in the
Yeah,
milk, right?
and
That's why we always drank milk, was for the calcium, and then you cut all that out. Yeah.
right, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So, you know, I, of course, I, on my list, like I have foods that are gluten-free, dairy-free, like that are good alternatives for these things. But if a child is really picky, I may start off with some supplementation just to kind of boost things up a little bit, until we can open up that palate and get them eating a more variety of foods. But
Mhm.
it's sometimes for my kiddos, it's a little bit of a, like a kind of a waiting game, because sometimes what I'll see is like as they start to sleep better, now all of a sudden they're a little more curious about that green thing on the plate, or that fruit, or that thing. So sometimes by supplementing at first with that magnesium, that calcium, whatever they need, um, it allows them to get the better sleep, and then we can come back to the dietary part of it and say, all right, let's start maybe adding some of these foods in there, so that they've just got more to work with. Yeah.
Mm.
But the nutritional part is absolutely, it's a huge part of it. And for some of my kids who have, well, not some, a lot of my kids have digestive issues, like with constipation and things like that, which of course can be affecting sleep too. And
Sure. They could
yeah,
be waking up because they're having pains in their tummy,
yeah, exactly, exactly.
which
And
is very common.
yeah. Yeah. So what I find is that for my children who have, like, when it's a true digestive disruption at night, we usually are going to see that in the first half of the night. So if a child is waking up after an hour or two, um, usually it's something digestion related. So that's enough to get a kid out of a deep sleep. If it's the latter part of the night, sometimes it can be something digestive, but oftentimes that's kind of like the sensory system, as I said before, kicking in. Now, of course, for a child, like a stomach discomfort may feel a lot different to them than it does for us. So there, again, there's a sensory component to that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So if the kid's waking up at 3, 4 o'clock, the parents are still going to have to probably intervene for a while, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just, and maybe do more joint compression, or.
Yeah, it's not always this is something that doesn't always work, but it's a good way to try and just like kind of cue the brain, like, hey, you're supposed to be sleeping right now, or you're supposed to be doing this. So
Mhm.
one thing I do implement with a lot of my kiddos who have these big wake ups is some kind of bedtime routine reset, where we pick up one or two things from the beginning of the night, so that the brain has that cue. Oh, I did that in the beginning, so maybe I should be sleeping.
Yeah.
Again, sometimes it works exactly in that way. Other times the wake up may still be persisting, but at least at that point, the child is a bit more calm. They're a bit more relaxed. We're not having as much like activity and hyperactivity and things like that. Now, it's that being said, like that bedtime routine reset is being put into place as we're trying to work on the independence, when we have the nutritional component, the sensory, all of those things in place as well. But it does not, I mean, you've got nothing to lose by trying to do that middle of the night with your child, to see if it helps them to get back to sleep faster.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm thinking my sister always, she's got 4 kids, and she has always laid down with them, next to them, to put them to sleep. And they're, what are they, 5, 7, and 10 are the little ones, and they still want her there in the bed. I'm like, well, you did that. You trained them. If they wake up in the middle of the night, mommy, mommy, it's like, they can't sleep unless she's laying there next to them, next to them, and she's exhausted because she got 3 kids on top of her in her bed. I'm like, you train them to go to sleep that way.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but you mentioned it though, with autistic kids, sometimes they need that the pressure or whatever, they need the body next to them. So that's just telling me if they're waking up at 3 a.m., they want you back in there again to put them back to sleep. So that tells me we need to come up with a different way of going to sleep initially without the parent laying there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I've had many families who have tried sleep training either on their own or with another sleep consultant who they have that training and that method. But I think a lot of parents that I talk to kind of intuitively know that if I leave the room, like, not only is my child going to be really upset because I'm not there, but they know there's something else to them being there. And it's usually that tactile component of, like, the brain's just seeking that pressure or whatever to just feel more regulated. But it's, again, that's where the sleep training part of all of this comes in, of like, okay, well, if the sensory system's getting what it needs, and nutrition's good, and we're getting enough physical activity, if your kid has learned over the last 2, 3, 5, 15 years that they need somebody there with them, that they're not trying to drive you crazy, that's just what they've learned. And I think for a lot of parents as well, they've kind of gotten into that habit with their children very often for good reasons. As we know, some kids have a very, very scary journey into this world, where it's like they could be weeks, months, or whatever in the hospital, and when they go home, parents just need to know their child is okay. So, like, yeah, they're going to sleep with parents. They're going to be held all night long. And, very often I'll have that conversation with parents, and they're like, yeah, but like everything's okay now. And we've kind of created a monster where, like, they need to be held like this all night long.
Right. I was going to say, it's really parent training.
Yeah. Yeah. That part of it is, yeah. And I stress that with my parents too. I'm like, look, this is habit learning for your child, but this is for you as well. Like, when you've been habituated to, my child cries, I need to do this, I need to get up, all of that, like, there's habit like reteaching on your end as well. And I think parents need to be understanding of themselves too, and know, like, it's years of reteaching, like relearning, that they have to do as well. And it's not going to be perfect every single night. But I think when parents have kind of made that decision, like, okay, like, we got to get them sleeping on their own and things like that, it's the energy that's getting put out is a totally different one once you actually start that process. And as long as parents are keeping an eye on that goal of, like, yeah, I'm going to get my child sleeping independently so they can have a great night's sleep, but I can have an hour or two to myself, in the evening. And, I'm able to be the parent and the caretaker and all of the other things that I need to be for my child. If I can do that more efficiently, like, it's worth it in the end.
Do you do virtual consults?
Yeah, I only do virtual consults.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Even before COVID, where I live in Philadelphia, like, it takes at least 30 minutes for me to get anywhere. So just to avoid the traffic and all of that, I just do it remotely. But what it has allowed me to do, it's allowed me to work with families all over the world. I mean, right now I have families on the East Coast, West Coast, Australia, and I think in the UK. I think I have one family I'm starting in the UK as well. So, this is because it's mostly me teaching parents. When I get to observe the child, it's amazing. It's like bonus points for me.
Right.
But it's really just teaching parents what they have to do, what all those potential what ifs are, those troubleshoots, and working together as a team to put that plan together and to implement it for better sleep.
That's awesome. All right. Well, great, because there's probably a lot of people that are going to want to call you. A lot of parents that need help in this area. So can you give us your contact info so that they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So feel free to, first of all, you can always visit my website, melissadomansleepconsulting.com. My email address is Doman, DOMAN, sleepconsults@gmail.com. But you can also
consult one with an S at the end, or no?
Yeah,
one consult or multiple consults?
Multiple consults. Yeah.
Okay.
Consults S. And then I'm also, I do a lot on Instagram, like giving free tips and advice and things like that. So feel free to give me a follow at Special Needs Sleep Coach on Instagram.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, Melissa, thanks so much for being here today. It was very, very interesting, very helpful. And I'm happy to have you on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing about your experiences with Robbie and his sleep. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I wrote this children's books series, right? It's 12 stories about him. It's about a little penguin with autism, but I hit on the sleep in one of the chapters.
Oh.
And let me see, which one is it? Okay, so look, I'm gonna show you. All right, so this is, okay, these are the girls, the twins, going through their bed routine, taking their baths, brushing their teeth, going to bed. They go to sleep with no problem, okay? Here's Robbie stimming in front of the TV.
Yeah.
Getting his clonidine. This has become the routine, right?
Wow.
And then finally around 11 o'clock, he's finally getting tired. Mom's like, okay, it's time to go to bed. She puts the weighted blanket on. I never did the weighted blanket, but I just threw that into the story, right?
Yeah.
Finally at midnight, mom gets to go to sleep. However, there's other nights where he wakes up at 3 a.m. and there he is stimming in front of the TV. Dad's exhausted, sleeping on the couch. And my husband, he really used to do this. He would sleep on the floor by the front door because we were so afraid of him eloping when he woke up in the middle of the night. And my husband would sort of guard by the door to make sure that he didn't run away in the middle of the night. So this is, but this night he actually slept all night. Woohoo! But it's such a common thing that I put a chapter in about that. So that's why I wanted to have you on. So yeah. So you might want to share this with your families. So, but I hit on all different things like, the eloping, the stimming, the sleeping, the picky eating, all that stuff, but in a cute way. Like kids and parents are all learning and they don't realize that they're learning, but, and then at the end, I do a mom's minute where I talk about what's really going on. And this is where he's starting to hit the age where the stimming is just getting like unbelievable. It's like getting out of control, but yeah. So
thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, when you first reached out, I looked at the books like briefly online, but that's amazing. I love those.
Yeah, but I don't go into a whole lot of detail about what all the chapters about. I just do like a quick video that's like we talk about this, and this. Yes, but one whole chapter is about the sleepings. That's why I wanted to bring you on. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy. This is such a pleasure and an honor to be on and to talk about this. As you said, it's such an important topic, and there's hope. There's hope to change it, and it can improve.
Good to know. Yay. A lot of exhausted parents out there that need you. So thank you. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Don't go away. Okay. All right. So thank you for being here. You have a great night.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.